Okay, Deb.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second of our Hot Topics webinars. This one is on garage conversions. I'm Debbie Sanderson. I'm on the Casita Board of Directors and spend a lot of time with managing our working groups. So thank you all for joining. You know, this events couldn't happen without our sponsors. So many thanks to Meta and Wells Fargo, plus a lot of other sponsors that you can see on the slides that are flipping by. And also we have promotional partners who help get the word out and advertise these events. So thanks to all of you for doing that. And also our working group. This is a group of professionals who've put together what they think is helpful advice on how to do garage conversions and how to think about them. So don't worry about taking notes. We have already prepared guidelines on garage conversions, and they are available on our website and on HCD's website. And we have additional guidelines that will be coming along. So before we start, I wanted to quickly make a couple of announcements. First, there are two tools that Casita Coalition has created that you might find of interest. The first one is an ADU gallery, which I find very exciting. It's to help homeowners do research on completed projects and to find other ADU professionals. Everyone can contribute. So if you're a builder and you want to submit your finished products, please let us know. The second tool is interpretations, compilation of HCD's interpretations. We call it the ADU Interpretation Index. With HCD's cooperation, what we've done is consolidated all of their emails, their answers, and the information in their ADU handbook and put it in a database with a very simple tool so you can search that database and find answers to your questions. And if they're not there, there's a form where you can submit questions to us. So that is a tool that's available to our members. We also have 5 events now that coronavirus has lowered its ugly head. We can get together. We have 2 industry mixers in March, one in LA and one in Alameda. These are to help ADU professionals find each other, get to know each other, and support each other. So those are the first 2. Then in March, we have an event in San Diego with a special guest, Gary Geiler, who will discuss San Diego's new rules for SB 9, which will be very interesting, and San Diego's ADU bonus program. And 4th and 5th, we have in April 2 ADU homeowner fairs. ADU members, Casita Coalition members are invited to participate as vendors. And I think it will be very exciting to provide that information directly to homeowners. So many thanks to all of the sponsors for these events, and more information will be available on the events page of our website. So please check it out. I think it'll be very fulfilling. So without further delay, I want to introduce our keynote speaker today. This is Dana Cuff, and she is a woman of many talents. She's a professor, an author, an architect, and director of the cityLAB at UCLA. She worked with Assemblymember Bloom on AB 2299, which got passed, many thanks to Dana, and it has made it much easier to build ADUs. So that was a lot of the foundation that we built on for the subsequent laws. So she's also received a lot of awards. I won't list them all, but my favorite is the Women in Architecture Activists of the Year Award. So go girls. And she's done a lot of very interesting work that affects ADUs and small homes. So please welcome Dana Cuff, who's also known as the godmother of ADUs. So take it away, Dana.
Thanks, Deb. Let's make sure my screen is getting shared. Do you see my screen? No? Yes?
Yes, presenter view.
I'm going to work on that now. How's that?
There you go. Perfect.
Great. Thanks, Deb. I don't know if I'm the godmother of ADUs, but I give full credit to Denise Pinkston, who was really a founder of Casita. Also, she and the Northern California team and myself and my partner, Jane Blumenfeld at cityLAB on the Southern California team co-authored AB 2299 and SB 1069 that took effect at the start of 2017, which really launched the, I think, revolution that you're all part of with ADUs. And I'm very pleased to have played some small part in that. Today, what I want to talk about very briefly, so that you can get onto the garage conversion webinar, is just some of the innovations that we see at cityLAB, which is my research center at UCLA, that really are pertinent to ADUs and our special focus, which is on affordable housing. I'll tell you, when we started, it took me 10 years to do the research that led to AB 2299, which is a slow slog when you think about it, and trying to change housing law and reform the way we provide housing, especially affordable housing in the state. We started thinking in really innovative terms about ways that ADUs could give back to their neighborhoods as a means of incentivizing political support, really, for secondary unit legislation. And having looked at lots of neighborhoods like the ones on the left in Los Angeles, where, as you probably are aware, the majority of ADU construction permitting is happening still in the state, and we hope that that spreads like wildfire and continues to do so as it has for the last 5 years, for the next 5. We started looking at things like alley garage conversions and ways perhaps that ADUs would be expected to do things like be solar energy driven or re-green alleys. In Los Angeles, we have 900 miles of alleys, all of which would really contribute significantly to environmental progress if they were permeable and made more sustainable, and also that they would become safer. And so that this would be a means by which ADU support might be encouraged. So many programs have evolved, of which Casita Coalition is the most comprehensive, to respond to those original legislative bills and the ones that have followed. And this is just a diagram of some of them, trying to categorize that some of the programs related to ADUs are design focused. Some are focused on shortening the timeline to construction from the idea through permitting to C of O, to technical assistance focused. We saw a lot of tech companies trying to move into the space of the ADU, especially garage conversions, as a means of providing construction services in new ways. And the last one is affordability focused. And I'm going to think a little bit more carefully about that. Really, what I think the future of our whole industry and interests are in Casita and ADUs is trying to find the sweet spot, if you can see my cursor, right there in the middle, where programs do all of the above. But just to look at a couple that are pretty comprehensive, the Cal Housing Finance Agency provides loans that for people who are converting garages or building new ADUs if they offer them to low-income tenants. And I suspect you're aware that in general, ADUs rent for less than the same square footage in other kinds of housing or apartments. So we're already somewhat more affordable, but not as much as people like me who are affordability advocates would like to see. And then cities have developed programs like the Napa program, to help support the construction of ADUs or junior ADUs if they rent to an affordable tenant or to a formerly homeless veteran. We had really expected many more of these kinds of programs to emerge. Some of those that did emerge didn't last long. Pasadena's is one of those. I think this ended in 2020, though someone in the audience may correct me to say that there's been a new version of it. But the idea that one of the ways we might both incentivize homeowners to build ADUs and to increase affordable housing through lending programs like this one, I think is something that is still going to receive more attention and should receive more attention. Similarly, there are architects and building companies, of which some of you may be representatives, like Moderator, which is still, I think, one of the most forward-thinking groups of ADU providers, where this particular program is around garage conversions, and at the same time has a kind of labor and construction policy so that the construction of their garage conversions is really a little like an IKEA kit of parts and instructions, so they can do a jobs hiring program, particularly of formerly incarcerated youth, to then learn construction through very simple and straightforward programs, and really have then a kind of full spectrum services that also provides design ideas. Just looking at the design side, Los Angeles really tried something that we at cityLAB thought about when we were first developing the research and then policy for ADUs, which was to pre-approve certain designs. The city of Santa Cruz did something similar. This was put into place in 2021, I believe, might have been 2020. Right now, there are 44 different approved plans in the LA Department of Building and Safety, and any builder or architect who wants to submit a set of plans to LADBS can do so. Once it's been checked through the agency, it then gets listed on the LADBS website, and a potential homeowner who's interested in that model can contact the architect or builder and customize the project for their own backyard. So I'm particularly interested, as someone who does architectural and affordable housing research, in the ways architecture might be a means towards more innovative ADUs and small housing solutions. This is one that I worked on with Kevin Daly Architects that was really looking at modes of construction that two women could carry the parts of the entire house down the side yard setback of 5 feet wide, expand it, and it would be extremely light. I think this particular demonstration house weighs 1/10 of what a standard construction single family house would weigh. And that is specifically a sustainability goal, that we put less embodied carbon into the backyards as we're doing these buildings. This one was called the Buy Home and sat on a pad that was exactly the size of a 2-car garage. So trying to show that we would be housing people rather than cars, just like the theme of today's Casita Symposium, and that we could do that in a sustainable manner. And my last slide is just showing you one further direction. This might be the Casitissima, super small accommodations that we're working on now. So though I don't think of something like these pods as housing, we have moved into thinking about small housing as a continuum of accommodation. And this is a commuter hub that we designed and built at UCLA in the rec center for students, primarily who are students of color and who've been underserved by the university, who live at home with their families and who have much lower economic means than other students who need a place to stay overnight at the university on occasion, often finding themselves, like other college students, sleeping in their cars. So something like 30% of college students now experience some form of housing insecurity. And we're using the university as a kind of test bed for thinking about a wider range of forms of small accommodation, at least for overnight. So with that, I'll stop sharing. And thank you for having me to an organization that I have very fond feelings for, and really appreciate the practical information that Casita Coalition delivers so
Thank
that
you.
we can build more housing.
Thank you so much, Dana. That was very interesting. And part of our webinar today will also cover some innovation. So stay tuned. Here's the way it's going to go today is that I'm going to introduce the moderator, and two members of our working group will make the presentation. Another member will highlight a couple of innovations. Then Renee, the moderator, will open it for questions. If you want to submit questions, please ask your questions using the Q&A button, not the chat button. So the Q&A button. And if you see questions that you think are particularly important, you can upvote those so we're more likely to see them quickly. And then at the end, we'll provide some links to the guidelines, and I'll close the meeting. So now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's webinar, which is Renee Schomp. She is the director of the Napa Sonoma ADU Center. And take it away, Renee.
Thank you so much, Deb. It is such a pleasure to be spending this Friday morning with all of you. And this morning, we are now going to hear from 3 practitioners, followed by a Q&A panel that will include those 3 presenters, as well as some additional subject matter experts. Since this webinar is focused on statewide regulations, please keep your questions broad. We're not going to be able to get into super specific localized questions. However, we encourage you to reach out directly to our subject matter experts if you have some of those more localized questions. Their websites and emails are going to be posted in the chat. So without further ado, today's presentation, as I mentioned, will be led by 3 ADU practitioners. I want to introduce you to Florentine Christian, the founder and CEO of Sidekick Homes; Carrie Shores-Diller, the principal architect and co-founder of Inspired ADUs; and Derek Ouyang, the founder of ADUO and City Systems. With that, I'm going to hand it off to those folks. I'm so excited for you all to hear the wonderful things that they have to share with you about garage conversions today. So Florentine and Carrie, I'll hand it off to you now.
Great. And I will kick us off. This is Carrie from Inspired ADUs. And we're going to give you a brief condensed overview of what it looks like to convert your garage into a dwelling unit. Many people, even some contractors, have an overly simplistic idea of what's involved in converting a garage unit. They have the idea that you can take this nice garage we see here, add some drywall, flooring, cabinets, plumbing fixtures, and voila, you've got an ADU that's ready to occupy. However, in reality, the process and requirements can be a bit more complicated than that. And unfortunately, the cost is usually a little more than most people expect. The reality is that you're taking a structure that was designed to house a car, and you're converting it to a space that's designed to accommodate people and the building codes needed for that and their safety. And while we get into exciting ideas of taking these garages that face the house and transforming this purple building into something lovely like Adapt Dwellings has done here with a downstairs ADU, we really want to start and dive into zoning. We like to look at zoning as the first kind of entry point to deciding if it makes sense, how you can have an ADU, whether it's more advantageous to convert your existing garage, whether detached or build new. So first thing we want to just outline is setbacks. setbacks are the distance from your property line, not your fence line, important to distinguish between the two, and the area of where you can build. The new California ADU laws have reduced those setbacks to 4 feet off the rear and side property. So one of the advantages of taking a 2-car garage, this is one we converted in San Francisco, by converting this existing space, you're able to keep this section in the setbacks. That's what we would call the existing non-conforming part of the building. You can keep that, but you can't make it more non-conforming, meaning you can't raise the roof, you can't add on within those setbacks. So any addition that you do to that space has to come outside of those 4-foot setbacks. But one of the advantages to using those setbacks and non-conforming space is that you're going to preserve more open space and yard for usability. This was a garage set in the way back. This is the driveway that used to come all the way to the garage. It's a model we see a lot in Northern California. And we were able to clip the the driveway, get more usable yard space, and convert this existing garage. It was in really good shape. So it was one of, I would say, almost the outliers of structures that are in a good position to change. But one thing I want to talk to you about too is property line walls. So while it's great to take advantage of this non-conforming space, you need to understand the logistics that these walls are going to have to be fire rated. So they're going to have to be changed to stucco, block, or a cement board with dense glass reinforcement. And you're going to have to get onto your neighbor's property to do that work. So while you might really like your neighbors now and it seems like no problem, keep in mind that as maintenance goes on with this structure, you are going to need to be able to access that. One nice workaround we do for clients is we let the neighbors pick the color. Since our clients can't see, that helps them feel like they've got a little more something out of the whole process and can help smooth things out. When you're thinking about design considerations, those property line walls, and this is that same garage converted, can't have any openings. And this is a good opportunity to just point out a lot of the ADU laws that we're working with now have simplified the planning process and the zoning, but they don't overhaul the building department and the fire department. So there's some different parts of the code that you want to understand. Any wall between 0 and 3 feet of the property line can't have any windows or openings in it at all. Once you get past 3 feet and before 5 feet, you can have 25% of your wall with glazing or windows and doors in it. So you want to think about the impact of that space, both in terms of life safety, of having an egress window to be rescued from, but also the quality of space that you're creating. Like, is it well lit? One design idea we always incorporate is that loading up those property line walls with function like a kitchen or closet system. That way you get all of that utility in that zone and then keep your the rest of your walls more open for daylight. Do you have to replace parking? With garage conversions, you do not have to replace the parking. When you're doing a detached new ADU, if you are within a half a mile of public transit, and that's walking, not as the crow flies, you are exempt from adding parking. Fire sprinklers. If the main house has fire sprinklers, the ADU must have fire sprinklers. Again, with all the different zoning, the fire department, fire marshal has a say on some of these elements too. If your house is more than 600 feet from a fire hydrant on the street, they could require you to have sprinklers. If the distance from the curb of your house to the back of the ADU, the furthest distance behind, exceeds 150 feet, they can require sprinklers in that case. And in both of those cases, you need to get a hydrant flow rate report to submit to the cities. Granted, those are a bit of the outliers, but it's just good to think about when you're starting to do your planning. So what about the idea of converting an attached garage? And you can convert, this is a big project that Sidekick Homes did, converting this front garage into an ADU. You can do this as an ADU or JADU, and Florentine is going to get into more of that distinction. But one of the things to keep in mind is that while the state has reduced rear and side setbacks, they have not required cities to reduce front setbacks. So if you're trying to expand or convert this front garage, you might have very real limitations into how much space you can add on to that. The other thing is that if you used to have a nice big garage door here, it's a really easy place to insert windows and doors from a cost perspective. But you also want to think about privacy too. Having the windows and doors facing the street or facing the driveway can also, create a space that's really a little bit on display. So you want to think from a design perspective how you can solve that. The other considerations to attached ADUs is that you're going to have an acoustic connection to the main house. So you're going to have a shared wall. And so that wall you could either build with an air gap or insulate, but most likely you're going to get some reverberation, some noise transfer. Other cost drivers are that you're going to have to fire separate that wall. You're going to have to provide that separation between the two. And then you also, again, like I mentioned, want to think about light. In this one, this was a one-car garage that was attached, and then we were able to pop up this new addition to get these extra light sources, to get windows and lights up above that kind of got you more space and felt brighter and better quality, but didn't make you feel on display. And then just a visual to think about reality when you're planning. We hear a lot of people say, oh, I'm going to take my 2-car garage and make it a 2-bedroom. And it's just, there are some very real limitations. This is that same ADU plan. And you can see the 2 walls on the property line don't have any windows because they can't. So you can't add another bedroom in the back because there's no way to be rescued for egress. And then also just looking at 1-car garage units, they are pretty tiny. This is one we just started in Oakland, and we have a tiny bathroom, a little kitchenette, a convertible bed. And so there is really some spatial limitations to what you can do in an existing footprint. And from that, I'd love to hand it over to Florentine, who's gonna take it from here. Okay, and you gotta unmute. Sorry, it's that awkward Zoom transition. You would think, we've all been doing
There we
Zoom
go.
for a year, but it's still a transition.
I know. Well, I've got multiple screens open right now so that I'm able to see my slides and see you guys and whatnot. So thank you, Carrie. I'm Florentine Christian with Sidekick Homes. So Carrie had mentioned a junior accessory dwelling unit. And I always get the question from people, what is a junior accessory dwelling unit? What is this JADU? And how does it differ from an ADU? So I just want to take a moment to talk about the junior ADU and what it is. So this is just a floor plan to help us visualize of a garage that we're converting to a junior accessory dwelling unit. So a junior accessory dwelling unit must be built within the footprint of the main dwelling structure. And this usually includes an attached garage. You'll want to check with your local jurisdiction on whether they allow attached garage to be included in the existing dwelling for a junior ADU purpose. It can be no larger than 500 square feet, which is usually fine for most attached garages. The owner must always occupy either the JADU or the main house. So not just for permitting purposes, but there actually will be a deed restriction, a covenant that gets recorded on title that will ensure that any future owner of the house also agrees that it will be owner occupied. You'll notice that there's a doorway here between the unit that we've created as well as the main house. And so a junior ADU actually can have a doorway into the main house, and it can also share a bathroom. This particular junior ADU has its own bathroom. That was what the client had wanted, but you'll notice there's also a bathroom right inside the door where we could have utilized that bathroom for the junior ADU and just created larger space without needing to do a separate bathroom. So those are some of the differences. Now, a lot of times people get really confused about why are there so many differences for this thing that's called a junior ADU? And the context I like to provide is that they were just created during a different time in history to suit a different need. They were created to allow a separate kitchenette for somewhat independent living on site in the case you had an elderly family member or a caregiver living on site. Our current ADU law was designed to create additional housing units. So it's created a little bit different in different contexts. So just to help you understand, so we've been moving forward with this ADU and passing all these ADU laws, and then there's this other thing over here called the JADU that we've also had to accommodate as we've moved forward. All right, so let's look at some differences between the ADU and the JADU. So in general, the ADU will likely be a little bit more expensive than the JADU. There are some cost savings with the JADU, predominantly because you can utilize the existing house systems. You don't necessarily have to have separate utility shutoffs. You can utilize the water heater, the thermostat, everything in the main house. You don't necessarily have to separate those things out. In addition, there may be less fire safety requirements in terms of needing to create a fire-rated wall between the two units. You can do it, a JADU is limited to the attached garage. You can do an ADU in a detached garage as well. And then in terms of replacement parking, we know that with ADU law, if you convert a garage, you do not have to replace that parking. With the junior ADU, there isn't that requirement in the state law. So it's really going to be up to each jurisdiction to determine whether or not replacement parking is going to be required if you convert a garage to a junior ADU. And then again, we talk about bathroom. The bathroom, of course, an ADU has to have its own bathroom. A junior ADU can actually share a bathroom with the main house. It doesn't have to be completely independent. And in terms of size, you may be able to build a larger ADU than you can a junior ADU. It is limited to the 500 square feet, which for most attached garages, that's going to be fine. And then setbacks is just, we're working with an existing space. So for a junior ADU, there really are no setback considerations because you can't really add, you're not really adding to the footprint, you're really staying within the existing. All right, so interestingly, you can actually create both on your property. So you can convert a space such as a garage to a junior ADU, and then you can have another detached ADU on your property. Essentially, you could end up with 3 units on your property. Sometimes people like to refer to this as a triplex. It's actually not a triplex. It's a single family house with an ADU and a junior ADU. So let's talk for a minute about, is my garage a good candidate to build an ADU? And in some cases, as you'll see in this picture here, this is a garage that it's no longer existing. We recently demolished it, but sometimes it is going to be more cost effective to demolish and build new, because what you're working with, you're going to have to do so much to improve it that it's really not going to be much of a cost benefit to actually work within the existing structure. So when people say that you're going to save money by doing a conversion versus a new build, sometimes that's the case, sometimes it's really not. It really depends a lot on the condition of the existing unit, how much of it can really be utilized for your ADU. Some things we can see is if you've got really large cracks in your slab and no footings in your foundation, probably you're looking at a new build. But a lot of times there's things that we can't necessarily see that could also make a project really costly. So let's talk about what some of the development considerations are for building an ADU. And these are all the things that could add to the cost. As Carrie mentioned earlier, a lot of times people have this misperception that we're just adding in cabinets and flooring and painting the walls and calling it a day. And in fact, a lot of the things that are going to cost you a lot of money are the things that people don't really think about, such as the foundation. Does your existing garage have deep enough footings for a housing unit? Is the slab adequate? Is rebar going to be needed, right? And what's it going to take to install that? Does the floor need leveling? And is there currently a moisture barrier? If not, that's something that's going to be needed. In addition to that, we want to look at the roof and the structure of the building. In a lot of cases with garage, you'll see in this picture, this was a garage that actually was an unpermitted unit. But look how much we had to rebuild on this because first of all, we needed a larger beam structurally. And then in addition to that, in order to place the R30 insulation that was required for this garage conversion, the 2x4 roof rafters weren't going to cut it, right? So we had to put larger rafters in there to accommodate all of the needs of this project. So these are some of the things that you're going to want to think about. And while you're at it, if you're having to redo the ceiling structure, you might think about giving yourself more volume. In a small footprint ADU, if you can create more volume, it can actually open the space up. It also adds a bit to the cost though. So again, you have to weigh your priorities for your project. Okay, the next thing that we want to look at is utilities. And this is something that can actually add quite a bit of cost to your project. And so in terms of utilities, you want to be thinking about where and how am I going to connect to the main lines for my electrical, gas, water, and sewer. Usually that means we're digging big trenches in your yard. A lot of times we can run multiple utilities in one trench, and sometimes we have to create multiple trenches based on the number of utilities and where we're bringing them in from. We also have to look at potential upsizing or upgrades. This is especially the case with our electrical panel and our water lines. So are they adequate for what we're wanting to build, or are we going to have to increase those? And then your sewer line, might it be in need of repair or replacement based on its current condition? So a lot of our homes were built 100 years ago. They may have original systems. A sewer system lifespan is usually about 50 years, right? So a lot of our sewers that we don't pay attention to because they're underground, we don't pay attention until they back up and cause us a problem. A lot of times they're already past their life expectancy, and a sewer replacement can add substantially to the cost of your project. All right, another consideration is fire safety. So how close is your garage to other structures on the property or to the property line? So if it's within 5 feet, you may have fire rating requirements that could add cost to your project. We also want to think about existing windows and exits, and are they going to allow for adequate ingress and egress requirements? And will fire sprinklers be required? Carrie talked about that a little bit, but you know, fire sprinklers can add a good $10,000 to $15,000 onto your project. So that's a pretty important consideration. And then finally, we want to look at your Title 24 energy code. And this is something that, you know, the new energy code that passed a couple of years ago can actually add quite a bit of cost onto the price of ADUs. We have people who maybe haven't built anything for a couple of years and they're surprised when they see the cost of the ADU, and they don't realize that, you know, a lot's changed with California code that we're needing to comply with. So you're going to want to look at, if your existing garage has windows, are those sufficient to meet your Title 24 calculations? What about the type of heating and cooling you're going to have in the unit? What is adequate and what's ideal for the space, and what's going to be most cost effective for your budget? And is there existing insulation in your garage? And if it is that insulation sufficient, again, to meet our current energy code standards? And a lot of times there's insulation, but it's not adequate. So all that insulation needs to come out and be replaced. And in some cases, we might actually have to create larger, thicker walls to actually get the insulation that's needed in the walls. All right, so one other thing that I just want to mention as we're talking about converting existing space is it's important to make sure that it's permitted space. So sometimes we see someone will have a garage and then there was an addition done to the garage that wasn't necessarily permitted. And if that space wasn't permitted, there's a chance that it might have to be demolished. There's a chance that it may not be allowed to remain, either because it's not going to meet building standards. It was never signed off with a certificate of occupancy, and it also may be encroaching into the setback area. So that's just always something important when you're looking at converting space, is to say, is this actually permitted space or is it not? Because if it's not permitted, you may not be able to keep the setbacks if it's infringing, in that 4-foot setback area. Let's talk a little bit about multifamily and what that means for ADUs. So you'll see with this picture, on the right-hand side are some detached garages, and on the left-hand side is apartments with tuck-under parking. ADUs can be built in both of those spaces on a multifamily property. The big distinction is that if you're with multifamily, you can either build 2 detached ADUs. Those 2 detached ADUs would be able to be built over here in this detached parking, or you can build up to 25% of the unit mix. So this particular apartment complex has 36 units, and we're actually, originally the client said, hey, can we, convert all of these 12 parking units, parking garages to ADUs? And I said, well, you're only going to get 2 ADUs out of them. What we can do though, if you want to build 8 or 9 ADUs, is we can actually convert down here and around the corner. We've got apartments up above and tuck under parking below. And rather than this particular complex hasn't had a soft story retrofit, so instead of going to the large expense of doing soft story retrofit, we're going to create units down below. We're going to get good cost savings on the structure, on the structural cost, and then we're also going to, create additional income with more units on this property. Let's talk about, next slide, we'll talk about attached garages within a unit. So some of the things that we're going to want to consider, especially if we're doing tuck under parking, as you'll see in the pictures here from Adapt Dwellings, is that we have to look at all of the existing space. So a lot of times when you're in that tuck under parking, you've got sewer lines that are running through there, water lines we have to accommodate, ceiling height. That's another thing. We have minimum ceiling height standards that we have to meet, as well as making sure that we're so far above grade. For water intrusion purposes. So we have a lot of parameters that we have to work within. And then we also have to figure out where are we going to put our windows and doors and what are those spaces looking out onto. It's not very attractive to have units looking out onto a driveway. So there's a lot of considerations when we're looking at, doing attached garages for multifamily, but lots of options as well that we can look at. So finally, in conclusion on my bit, I do just want to talk just briefly about cost considerations. So if you have an existing structure that is sound, converting a garage will typically save you on cost. Typical, 2-car garage, depending on where you are, could save you, maybe a good $40,000 or more or less on the cost of your ADU, but it depends on a lot of factors. It depends on the size that you're building, what are current construction costs, what are the building code requirements for building within an existing versus building new, what are the structural improvements, the utility upgrades, the fire safety compliance, the ceiling type. We had 2 projects last year that were the same size. They were both attached garage conversions, and one of those projects was over double the cost of the other. So it's really hard. People always want to know what's a cost per square foot, what's a general cost. It really depends on your project. That's really where you're going to want to hire a professional to come in and advise you on what the best options are for your project. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to our moderator. I think we've got next panelist or next speaker here who's going to present a few extra things for us.
Hi, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Derek. Take it away.
Thanks. This is Derek Ouyang. I'm part of City Systems and am working on a garage conversion innovation. There are a few exciting things happening in the state on these garage conversion options that can attempt to address some of these cost challenges and implementation challenges that have been discussed today. Symbi Home is one of them that you just saw that is in the works. And my own attempt here is a nonprofit grant-funded project called ADUO. Both of these innovations are a kind of prefab panelized kit approach for inserting into an existing garage, either detached or attached. The ADUO process, as you can see here, involves bringing in some templates and then dropping in garage, kitchen and bathroom panelized components. It's designed to be wheelchair accessible to try to reduce the cost as much as possible. So the goal is to be under 100K, all costs considered. A major goal of mine is that these designs will then just be free and open source on the web. So this is just increasing the amount of access to local contractors and manufacturers to an ecosystem of either being involved in the panelized part creation or being involved in the assembly. We've got 2 pilots going in the Bay Area, in East Palo Alto and North Fair Oaks, particularly to lower income households. So I'm looking forward to finishing those projects this year and then putting all this documentation, YouTube videos, etc., online. And you're welcome to follow along in that process. All right, back to the moderator.
Thanks so much, Derek. And I'm wondering if we can just take 1 minute to go back to that Symbi Home slide to give a little bit more detail on Symbi Home. Derek, do you feel like you can share a little bit more on that?
I believe this is focused in San Jose currently and is unique because the pieces that have been developed are CAHCD approved. So I think this will be open to a large market once it's moving forward. But other information, feel free to look at symbihome.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Derek. I love that we're covering, kind of current work, stick belt work, and then also innovations today. So thank you all for joining us. And thank you so much to Florentine, Carrie, and Derek for your very thorough and informative presentation. So now we are going to turn to questions for our industry experts. And as I mentioned earlier, we have 3 more experts joining the presenters for the Q&A portion. Gracie O'Rourke, Director of Design at Adapt Dwellings, Rolf Bell, founder of Green Living Builders, and Jared Basler, co-founder of the ADUO Coalition and board member of the Casita Coalition. So as a reminder for all of you this morning, to ask a question, please do so by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. not the chat, just so that we can have all of our questions streamlined in one place. So go to that Q&A chat, start entering your questions. And again, given that the ADU law applies statewide, it's most useful if you focus your questions on broader topics rather than site-specific problems in a local jurisdiction. Again, if you have those site-specific questions, please feel free to reach out directly to our experts. Their contact info is in the chat. So we're going to get to as many questions as we can today, either live or in the Q&A. We've already had our wonderful presenters typing written answers to some of your questions in the Q&A chat. And if you don't get your question answered, please feel free again to directly reach out to our panelists. Attendees, you also have the ability to upvote questions to give them a higher priority ranking. So if we're able to get to those, we will do so in the moment. All right, with that, I am going to turn to actually some of our new panelists to hear from them. So Gracie, first of all, I would love to hear from you a little bit more on what are some of the design considerations that you might consider when creating a converted garage ADU.
Yeah, first I want to say hello, everybody, and thank you for having me today. I think Carrie and Florentine did a great job going over a lot of these building required elements for the ADU. So I'm just going to try to fill in the gaps a little bit of what I saw, but some of the major ones are foundations, especially in converted garages. You are required to have that vapor barrier that they talked about. So sometimes that means taking up the entire slab and pouring a new one. On top of that, a lot of times there's like existing trees around. So you need to make sure that those trees aren't going to undermine your new foundations and, you know, any new plumbing lines that are coming in. Natural light can be a challenge, especially if you're close to a property line or if you're dealing with an existing garage that's like underneath a multifamily building, especially since bedrooms and living rooms and living area are required to have good natural light for code, but also just to live in. You don't want to have a bedroom without a window. So sometimes you're limited to what you can build in a garage. Sometimes you might want to have like a 2-bedroom unit, but that's not necessarily feasible if you have only one wall of windows accessible. Some other things to consider are roof drainage. If you're changing the roof line, you need to think about where you're dumping all of that water. You don't necessarily want to put that all on your neighbor's property and then have an issue with them later down. So doing some smart eco-friendly things with landscaping, it's an opportunity for your new roof. And privacy is a big one, not only for your neighbors, but also for the existing home, especially if you're going to be renting that out. And then lastly, if you have a unit or a garage in the rear of your property, you need to think about slope for your bathrooms to make sure that you have, you know, your sewer lines are going to work. And if you don't have that slope, you might have to install an ejector pump or find a different solution. So that's kind of my fill in the blanks there, but I'm sure we'll have more specific questions come up in Q&A.
Thank you so much, Gracie. That's really helpful for folks. We really appreciate it. I want to turn and make sure that we hear from Rolf as well. So Rolf, I have kind of an open-ended question for you, and we covered some of this already, but really just generally speaking, what are some of the things that you see homeowners most surprised by when they set out to do a garage conversion?
Certainly. I have to say that Carrie and Florentine took away about 12 of my speaking points. They were so comprehensive. So hats off to both of you. Really well done. They touched upon some of the things that I will speak to, and you know, pay attention to your utility costs. So on one of your first visits with a hopefully like an architect contractor team, they together they can quickly assess kind of the ballpark of what the new electrical panel will require. In most cases, I would say 80% of the ADUs we put in also need a new electrical panel for the main house and the ADU. And keep in mind, Florentine brushed upon this. You know, the Title 24 numbers often lead us to building ADUs that are 100% electric, and that has a lot of benefits in terms of environmental costs, but it also has some upfront expense costs that over time will pay for themselves, but you'll feel that cost at the front end of building an ADU. So you're thinking about a few different systems that most homeowners aren't kind of aware of. condenser, mini split systems for heat and cooling versus a furnace and or a traditional HVAC system. You're considering often an induction stove. Induction heat is very efficient, more temperature controlled, has no CO2, but most of us, when we were young in our 20s and 30s, ran away from electric stoves because they cook so poorly and loved gas stoves. And now we're returning to a new version of a high-tech electric stove, which is actually quite impressive in terms of how well it cooks. And even the French Laundry here in California, one of our Michelin restaurants, has converted to induction stoves. That's helpful to kind of say, oh, they're that good? Okay. So those are some of the kind of the immediate things. But I think what was also touched upon by Carrie and Florentine was the fact that a lot of the garages simply can't be renovated. They're just in too bad of shape. In my experience, it's about 80% need to come down versus be rebuilt. But every once in a while, 4 out of 5, we hit one that has great structural integrity and is great to work with. And some even have some impressive height versus the traditional 10 to 12 feet height garages. We just did one that has a 20-foot height double story that was the original garage, which was a great one to convert. So you're going to hit higher, as was already shared by my colleague, higher foundation costs, higher utility costs, and I think the other kind of thing that we have not really touched upon is what an ADU garage can give to a housing complex. It gives tremendous housing flexibility. And so sometimes that the expense of building that into your compound, if you will, versus your yard, now you have a compound, it gives you flexibility. As a number of my clients have aged in place and have moved out of the main house because of the stairs and or because they can just appreciate additional income off the main house. And so we've designed the ADU not as a rental or as a kind of extra house. It's really their new house. And
absolutely.
And Carrie and Florentine and others are just experts at creating really good ADA space for clients that want to age in place. And that comes with more cost to do a house well. But the side part of that is that you're getting a tremendous amount of income off of your main house. So it's really important to balance and understand that ADUs cost more than you think they should, and your overall compound will be worth a lot more money rental wise and eventually a resale value.
Thank you so much, Rolf. Yes, I'm so glad you highlight those benefits for us. Sometimes as industry professionals, we start talking about all the challenges that might arise, and it's so wonderful to bring it back to, and this is why it's all worth it in the end. With that, I actually want to turn to Derek and then Jared on a question, bringing it out a little bit to the policy side from the nuts and bolts. So Derek, do you think you could share with us, what do you think are some key things that our local jurisdictions throughout California could do to change their local ordinances to make it easier for homeowners specifically to do garage conversions? And I'm thinking a little from Derek on this and then a little from Jared.
Sure, thanks. Some of my experiences, particularly from East Palo Alto, and there was a past Casita webinar with a spotlight on East Palo Alto. First things first, just have your basic ducks in order. I've experienced garage conversion submittals where the jurisdiction still did not have the state law updated. And it could be that it's just somewhere in the inner workings of staff, notes from past years, so like an internal audit just to make sure that the information being provided during the application process is still correct. I was being incorrectly quoted on the parking replacement requirement as of just months ago. Keep in mind that so many of the steps that can be slow move at the critical path. And the critical path may not involve specifically the local jurisdiction, but many of these other approving agencies, sewer, fire, school, water. And you might feel as a local jurisdiction like that's out of your purview. But if you really want to support clients and applicants through the ADU process. It would help to at least send them to the right districts. I've been sent to the wrong water district as of recently, and help applicants get a sense of what they actually have to prepare for with those different jurisdictions. A few other quick ideas. I think you can reduce fees for garage conversions compared to other kinds of additions or residential projects. I've noticed that it helps if a local jurisdiction has discretion allowed for keeping the door between an attached ADU and the main house. This would be required for a JDU, but usually is disallowed for attached ADUs. But there's enough flexibility in family needs, as I've seen, that families really would prefer that at times. And lastly, just keep the idea of fostering public-private partnerships, because if you can't recommend, say, contractors and vendors, and that would be really helpful to the community, then partner with nonprofits would be the front face and can do that on behalf of your community.
Thank you so much, Derek. And actually, Jared, I know I asked for you to add on there, but we're reaching the end of our time. We have one final question in the Q&A I'd love to turn to. Jared or others, very, very briefly, do you have any experience with garage conversions in townhomes and condos? Does anyone have anything they want to share on that? Rolf,
I've been
Florentine?
waiting for that kind of client to come around, but yeah, and they do come around from time to time. There's just so many unknowns, especially with the ownership, or even the idea of townhomes with either a garage conversion or even doing a detached. It all is going to depend on how that land is owned. Is one issue that I've run into. But yeah, that's a rabbit hole that I don't think many people have gone down yet.
We're working on one right now in Oakland, and it's a garage conversion for a condo, and that ADU has to belong to one of the condos specifically. So we're running into that right now. Yeah.
The other thing,
All
I just
right,
want to
great.
touch one last thing on what you asked, Derek, is that the one thing that I see the biggest need for jurisdictions to work on is coordination between departments when they're talking about ordinances, because it does no good if building is going to be looking at it completely differently. And when it comes to things like moisture barriers and options for that, and filling in that opening with a stem wall versus a traditional slab on grade foundation, like just those kinds of things are things that need to be worked out between the departments.
I could not agree more. Thank you for that. On that note, thank you, Jared. A special thank you again to all of our special guests today: Florentine Christian from Sidekick Homes, Carrie Shores-Diller from Inspired ADUs, Derek Ouyang from ADUO and City Systems, Gracie O'Rourke, Adapt Dwellings, Rolf Bell, Green Living Builders, Dana Cuff from cityLAB, and of course, Jared Baszler. We are so appreciative to all of you. I'd also like to thank all of the members of our local government working group here at Casita Coalition who have contributed their time and energy to this topic and to development of the guidelines. And a huge shout out to Chris Pazis from Adapt Dwellings for all of his works on today's PowerPoint presentation. We also invite other small housing professionals, community-based organizations, and homeowners to add your voice and join the conversation by becoming a member or donating to the Casita Coalition. Our garage conversion guidance memo is available for download on the Casita Coalition and state HCD websites. The links will be in the chat. Highly recommend that you check that out as well. And with that, thank you all once again. I'm going to hand it over to you, Deb, to close us out. Unmute yourself first.
Thank you. This was a very interesting webinar I found, just chock full of practical how-to kind of guidance. So we thank you very much for attending, and I wanted to remind you that we have to check our website on the events page for the upcoming events that we have scheduled. These are kind of a new thing for us. We're very excited about being able to finally see people face to face rather than just through Zoom. And you can sign up for our newsletter and for announcements for new webinars. So our next one coming up is a tough topic. It's how to handle unpermitted ADUs. So thanks for everyone, and thanks for you for attending. And I hope to see all of you at one of our mixers or an additional webinar. So thanks very much and goodbye.
Thank you.